Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at an editorial from page number 6 of the Delhi edition. This editorial evaluates the measures taken by the RBI in order to help the country brave the impact of the second wave of the pandemic. Recently, the RBI has announced a few specific targeted measures towards the healthcare sector and as well as to assist the state governments and the common public. Because the ferocious second wave of the pandemic has completely overwhelmed our healthcare infrastructure and it is already having a devastating impact on the economy as well. So, during this time of unprecedented crisis, the priority is not just to save lives but also to save livelihoods. Even last year, when the pandemic broke out and when the country went into a sudden lockdown, the RBI stepped in with a variety of monetary policies and interventions in order to help support the economy, which had virtually been brought to a standstill. To help out the borrowers, the RBI had then announced a loan moratorium, and it also increased credit support and lending of loans to various key sectors. Through such timely interventions, the RBI managed to absorb some of the economic impact of the pandemic. And later, as the first wave started to subside, the RBI also played a key role in reviving the economy, which in turn helped in restoring millions of livelihoods. But now, within a span of few months, a second deadly wave has hit India ferociously. And at a time when the healthcare sector is overburdened and overwhelmed, and at a time when both lives and livelihoods are under great threat, the RBI has stepped in with a few measures to provide relief to the healthcare sector and as well as to state governments and the common public. Recently, the RBI announced a term liquidity facility that is dedicated for the healthcare sector. Under this facility, it has asked banks to collectively set aside around 50,000 crore rupees, which would be provided as priority credit to the healthcare sector, which is being treated as a priority sector. This loan facility comes with a tenure of 3 years and the interest rate would be charged at repo rate, and all healthcare related industries and institutions can avail of this loan, including vaccine manufacturers, hospitals, pathology and diagnostic labs, suppliers of oxygen, etc. This priority lending will provide some relief to healthcare institutions which are at the forefront of this battle against the pandemic. And the RBI governor has even said that this facility will even cover the patients who have been hit by the pandemic. But as of now, it's still not very clear as to how individual patients would be benefited from this scheme. But any such relief and assistance from the RBI would be highly appreciated because around the country, lakhs of COVID patients are being pushed into economic misery due to their rising medical bills. The only concern with regard to this lending facility is that whether our capital stressed banks would they be able to provide this lending and would they be able to take this loan burden. If the RBI ensures that the lenders, that is the banks, implement this priority lending in a timely manner, then it would provide the much needed financial support for the healthcare sector and as well as to individual patients. Then apart from this, to help out the state governments which have come under immense financial stress, the RBI has further extended the ways and means advances facility that is available to the state governments with further extensions and flexibility on the overdraft facility. Ways and means advances allows the state governments to borrow from the RBI when they are facing a short-term cash shortage due to the mismatch or the disruption in cash flow caused by the mismatch in receipts and expenditures. Since state governments are bearing the financial burden of increased expenditure on healthcare, such additional means of short-term borrowing is bound to help out the state governments financially. And by extending these facilities, the RBI is sending out the right message to the overall economy. Then apart from this, the RBI has also announced an enhanced credit facility along with a new resolution framework to help out small businesses, including the MSME industry and the unorganized businesses. Because these borrowers have been the worst hit during the pandemic. And apart from last year's financial support that was extended, the RBI has announced enhanced credit for these borrowers, along with a new resolution framework which can help restructure any failed loans or non-performing assets. But however, the eligibility criteria announced by the RBI excludes the most vulnerable amongst these borrowers, and hence the editorial is calling upon the RBI to take a relook at the eligibility criteria. As per the current guidelines of the RBI, those who had availed of these benefits last year, they won't be eligible to avail of these benefits again. But the editorial points out that it is this section among the small borrowers and MSME industries and unorganized businesses that are in dire need of help, and hence the RBI should consider relaxing the eligibility criteria. Then, on a final note, the RBI expects only a moderate impact on the economy as a result of the second wave. Latest reports and statements coming out of the RBI indicates that the RBI is expecting a quick economic recovery in a few months, and it anticipates only a moderate impact on India's economic prospects as a result of the second wave. But this assumption of the RBI might be a little premature because these estimates are largely based on the limited data that has been collected in the initial days of the second wave, and this data might be skewed because initially most governments went for localized restrictions instead of a full-fledged total lockdown. But now, as the second wave is headed towards its peak, most states and most regions in the country have headed towards a total lockdown. And in fact, there is growing pressure on the central government to impose a national lockdown as soon as possible in order to break the chain of transmission. And several experts and even opposition parties have been pressurizing the central government to go in for a national lockdown in order to help reduce the burden on the healthcare infrastructure. So current RBI estimates doesn't take this into account. And if a national lockdown were to be put in place, then it is going to have a devastating impact on the economy. And that is something the RBI will have to factor in. But in conclusion, by providing a timely lending hand to the healthcare sector and to state governments and to the common man, the RBI has sent out the right signal at a time when the country is battling the second wave of the pandemic. Now let's take up a column from page number 6 that deals with the latest communal clashes that broke out in Northern Ireland. The writer, who is a former Foreign Secretary of India, argues that the complex history of Ireland and the current tensions in Northern Ireland hold lessons for India because any functioning democracy should commit itself to addressing communal issues with great vigilance, tolerance, and a willingness to compromise. See, the communal conflict in Northern Ireland is essentially between Protestant Christians who are pro-British or pro-United Kingdom, and they are referred to as the Unionists, as they wish to remain a part of the United Kingdom. On the other hand, we have the Catholic Christians who are Irish nationalists seeking to liberate Northern Ireland from United Kingdom and unite this region with the Republic of Ireland. To understand this further, let's look at this map. This map shows two large islands in the Atlantic Ocean, which is Great Britain and Ireland. See, Great Britain is made up of England, Wales, and Scotland. And you add Northern Ireland to this, then you get the sovereign government of the United Kingdom. So, United Kingdom is essentially a sovereign government that comprises of four countries, that is England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. Whereas the Republic of Ireland that you can see over here is a separate independent nation which continues to remain a member of the European Union. Because on the other hand, the UK has recently quit the EU after Brexit, and hence Northern Ireland is no longer a part of the European Union. Since many decades, the United Kingdom has witnessed two major separatist movements, one in Northern Ireland and the other in Scotland. There are many Scottish nationalists who have been pushing Scotland away from the UK and seeking independence from the UK. But of late, this political movement has died down, and the Scottish independence movement never witnessed any major violence as such. But in Northern Ireland, the story was entirely different. And through the 1970s and 1990s, Northern Ireland was witness to an active insurgency led by the Irish Republican Army, which was leading a violent insurgent struggle against the United Kingdom in order to liberate Northern Ireland and unite Northern Ireland with the Republic of Ireland. So this political conflict eventually acquired a communal overtone because the Irish nationalists who were seeking to liberate Northern Ireland from UK and who were seeking to unite Northern Ireland with Republic of Ireland, they were Catholic Christians. Whereas the pro-British Unionists who wanted to retain Northern Ireland within UK, they were Protestant Christians. So this political conflict has a deep communal resonance as well. And even though the violent phase of this conflict was brought to an end back in 1998 through the Good Friday Agreement, every now and then the issue keeps flaring up in Northern Ireland, and especially following Brexit, these tensions have increased further, even leading to communal clashes recently between the Protestants and the Catholics. The writer argues that this sudden increase in communal violence in Northern Ireland provides valuable lessons for India because the latest communal violence in Northern Ireland is a direct result of deliberate political and social polarization that has been carried out by various political entities and parties following Brexit. See, the question of Britain leaving European Union became a highly emotive and sensitive subject with great political and social ramifications for the United Kingdom. Across England and Wales, there was tremendous support for Britain leaving the European Union, and hence a majority of the population in this region were pro-Brexit. In Scotland, on the other hand, due to separatist tendencies and political differences, the same kind of support did not exist. And in Northern Ireland as well, there was divided opinion on the question of Brexit. When the Brexit referendum was held, in Northern Ireland, the Protestant Unionists, they wanted to vote for Brexit, and they wanted United Kingdom along with Northern Ireland to break away from the European Union because they were hoping that by pulling Northern Ireland away from the European Union, they could also pull Northern Ireland away from the Republic of Ireland, which still happens to be a member of the EU. They also hoped that if UK along with Northern Ireland quits the European Union, then a hard border might come up between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And the Protestant Unionists hoped that these strict border controls will not only reduce trade and interaction between Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland, but it would also reduce the nationalistic activities of the Irish Catholics. In this hope, the Protestant Unionists, with some conservative politicians from England and Great Britain, they started a polarizing campaign, and this ended up aggravating the communal divide between the Catholics and the Protestants. But contrary to their belief, Northern Ireland has been striving to remain closer to Republic of Ireland, and they managed to work out a soft border control mechanism as a part of the Brexit deal, which has further raised the aspirations of liberating Northern Ireland and uniting it with Republic of Ireland. So these polarizing views of Irish Catholics and Protestant Unionists, which has been actively supported by conservative and radical politicians, has ended up communalizing the Northern Ireland region. And this rising communal polarization is directly responsible for the latest communal clashes that we have witnessed. Along with this, the Northern Ireland region has remained backward and underdeveloped due to the decades-long conflict that has been going on in the region. And as a result, poverty rates are extremely high in Northern Ireland, accompanied with poor education, high unemployment, and poor standard of living. These factors as well make the conservative elements more vulnerable for radical extremism, which in turn directly contributes to communal tensions. Now, according to the writer, these complex troubles of Ireland has valuable lessons for India because any such communal tensions which are created by political and social polarization will have to be resolved with the immediate intervention of the political leadership of the country. Because in any functioning democracy, it's very important to address the communal issues by strictly acting against any phobias, stereotypes, and prejudices that are promoted against the other community. And the political leadership should lead from the front in remaining vigilant against attempts to polarize and communalize. And it is the political leadership which has the responsibility to build tolerance in the society and work towards compromise between two communities. But if the political leadership itself is involved in these acts of polarization, then of course it's going to contribute to rising communal tensions, which would end up eroding the democratic state itself. So the political leadership in any country will have to draw these lessons and will have to proactively take steps to act against communal polarization, or else the consequences of it will severely damage every section of the society, and hence it becomes the duty of the political leadership to fight against the deeply entrenched phobias, stereotypes, and prejudices that are held against the other communities. Now let's take up a few articles from page number 1, page number 8, and page number 14, which deal with the topic of intellectual property rights of vaccines and the need to waive off these patents during the pandemic. See, the vaccines that are produced through extensive research and development, they are protected and guarded through intellectual property rights known as patents. The knowledge behind its development, the materials used, the process that is employed, and the overall product is patent protected. This patent granted by the governments according to their respective national laws, which would be in line with WTO TRIPS, grants ownership over the product and the process to the company which is invested in its R&D, and thereby provides them with exclusive manufacturing rights over these patented items. Others who seek to manufacture the same patented item or product will have to obtain the prior permission of the patent owner and will also have to pay a royalty to them. The same goes for vaccines and medicines as well. But during a pandemic, these patents over vaccines and essential medicines have reportedly hampered the production of these essential drugs. And hence, last year, India and South Africa made a proposal at the WTO seeking a temporary waiver of patents under the TRIPS or the trade related intellectual property rights so that the poor and the developing countries could step up their vaccine production and procurement of essential medicines in order to effectively combat the pandemic. This proposal of India made last year was recently reviewed and taken up by the United States following the deadly rise of the second wave in India. And recently, the Biden administration in the US has extended support to this proposal of India and South Africa to ease the patent regime or to waive off patents temporarily over vaccines in order to help poor and developing countries to step up their vaccine production, which will help them in their fight against the pandemic. This extension of support from the US has been followed up with support from France as well, and even from Russia. And these countries have expressed willingness to take up this proposal at the WTO. But it has been facing stiff opposition from the big pharmaceutical firms, which are worried about possible loss of patent rights and revenue. And even countries such as Germany have stiffly opposed any such waiver of patents, and both have cited several valid reasons to justify their arguments. Now, the European Union is divided on this issue, but it has expressed willingness to talk to the US and other powers. And these high income major economies are looking how to best resolve this issue concerning patents of vaccines. See, for most of the COVID-19 vaccines, the patents are held by Western pharmaceutical companies, all of which are headquartered or located in high-income developed countries. According to the argument of few poor and developing countries like India and even South Africa, the patent restrictions has hampered production of vaccines and the procurement of vaccines, and hence they are seeking a temporary waiver under the WTO TRIPS so that emergency use authorization could be provided. And even these patented vaccines could be produced in generic form by other domestic producers. As of now, India has welcomed the decision of the United States to support India's proposal, and India has said that if the proposal is adopted at the WTO, it is going to help our fight against the pandemic, as it will help in scaling up the production of vaccines. But this would require the support of all the 164 members of the WTO, because decisions in the WTO are made through consensus, and even a veto by one member is going to fail the resolution. However, a few countries like Germany and few big pharmaceutical companies, they do have a few valid reasons as to why they are opposing the waiver of patents. See, for poor and developing countries and for activists who support the waiver, the demand is for equitable and affordable access to these vaccines. Now, this demand is being supported by major countries like US, France, and Russia, but even countries like Germany do have a valid point. The argument against the waiver of patents being made by the big pharma and countries like Germany is that if such a blanket waiver is provided, it is going to disrupt the supply chain of vaccines that currently exists, and it could actually hamper our fight against the pandemic. Now, how would that be possible? Because according to Germany and the big pharmaceutical companies, most of the poor and developing countries have production limitations. And it's not that they could scale up their production capabilities overnight if the patents are waived off. Even for countries like India, which is seen as the world's largest producer of vaccines, it won't be an easy task to scale up the production just because the patents are waived off. If countries rush to produce vaccines in a hurried manner, it could result in the compromise of quality and safety standards, thereby posing a threat to vaccine safety itself, and any adverse events could result in vaccine hesitancy amongst the population. Because if vaccine production is outsourced to local domestic companies, quality and safety cannot be guaranteed, and this could threaten the safety of the vaccine and as well as vaccine acceptability. Then, along with that, any such patent waiver will discourage innovation and investments in research and development, especially at a crucial time when multiple new mutant variants are developing. And in order to engage in a constant fight against the virus, we need our R&D institutions to constantly maintain vigilance and invest enough resources to conduct research and development, which will help us in coming out with new interventions against these mutant variants. Representatives of the big pharma have argued that the current shortage in the supply of vaccines is being created by the scarcity of raw materials, which is largely a result of trade barriers and export controls that have been placed by countries such as the US through its Defense Production Act. They argue that if the existing bottlenecks in the supply chain are removed, and if the developed countries share the existing stockpile of vaccines generously with poor and developing countries, then there won't be a need for patent waiver, as it could end up having several unintended consequences. But the decision of US and France to support the proposal of India and Russia has been welcomed by the Gavi Vaccine Alliance and the WHO as well, who are leading the COVAX facility for vaccine sharing, and have extended their complete support for patent waiver. See, there is no doubt that such a patent waiver would be beneficial for countries like India. Because see, currently under the WTO TRIPS, India is bound by the patent restrictions. And due to TRIPS obligations, India had to amend its Patents Act in 2005, which currently restricts India's ability to produce generic versions of patented vaccines and drugs. But in the initial days, India used to follow product patenting, and it was only in the 1970s that India moved towards process patenting. Now, what's the difference between the two? A product patent ensures that the rights to the final product is protected, and anyone other than the patent holder can be restrained from manufacturing it during a specified period. This restriction applies even if they were to follow other different processes. Whereas a process patent, on the other hand, enables any person or any manufacturer other than the patent holder to manufacture the patented product by modifying certain processes in the manufacturing exercise. So India had moved from product patenting to process patenting in the 1970s, and this allowed India to become a significant producer of generic drugs on a global scale. This is what allowed Indian companies like Cipla to provide Africa with anti-HIV drugs in the 1990s. This is how Indian pharmaceuticals became the backbone of the healthcare programs of several poor and developing nations. But following the adoption of TRIPS by WTO, India was bound by the new obligations, and India had to amend its Patents Act, which India sees as a restriction for scaling up vaccine production, especially generic vaccines, considering that the world is battling a pandemic. So that's the reason why India has welcomed this support by US, France, and Russia. But however, strong counter arguments have been made by the big pharma and as well as by other countries such as Germany. Next, according to this article on page number 13, China has called off its strategic economic dialogue with Australia. This strategic economic dialogue was a key diplomatic channel for trade talks between China and Australia, and it has been called off by China as a symbolic protest against Australia's moves to target China on a wide range of geopolitical and strategic issues, including human rights, cybersecurity and espionage, and the origins of COVID 19. See, China happens to be Australia's largest trading partner, and Australia has even put in place a free trade agreement with China since 2015. But over the last 6 to 7 years, considerable differences have emerged between China and Australia, especially after Australia became strategically closer to the US and after the two countries came together under the quadrilateral grouping. Following the lead of the US, Australia has challenged China's dominance in the Indo Pacific, and these geopolitical tensions have spilled over into other areas as well, such as 5G networks. Last year, Australia ordered an investigation against China's telecom giant Huawei, and Australia has actively blocked Huawei's involvement in Australia's 5G networks. These diplomatic and geopolitical issues is having an impact on the trade relations between China and Australia, and China has retaliated by imposing tariffs on several essential and critical items which have disrupted Australian industries such as wine, barley production, coal, etc. China has blamed Australia for the current deterioration in the relationship, and it has accused Australia of following a Cold War mindset based on which Australia has ideologically aligned with the US. So the global geopolitical rivalry between China and US is also affecting Australia's relations with China, as Australia has firmly sided with the US in this ongoing Cold War. Then finally, we have this column on page number 6, and I want you to go through this once because we have already covered this discussion in detail in our previous sessions. In this column, the writer is holding the government accountable for its failure in containing the second wave of the pandemic, and he says that the central government and the state governments have committed social murder through their acts of omission and commission, and such a colossal failure of the state and governance machinery cannot be excused and cannot be defended, and the responsible governments will have to be held accountable for their mistakes, else it is going to have serious consequences for the democracy. Now let's look at the mains practice questions. The first question: discuss the measures taken by the RBI to reduce the burden on healthcare providers during the pandemic. The second question: what lessons do the communal tensions in Ireland offer to India? Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. This concludes our discussion for today. Thanks for watching.